Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fanny Glover, and to my immediate right is
Alsha Kasam, the Community Education Coordinator here.
and our technology guru, because it is not me. Before we introduce our wonderful speaker today, first of all, I want to say I am so pleased that so many of you could join us. But today we're going to do something that we haven't done in the past. We're going to record the entire event. And because we've been receiving so many requests asking, can we have a recording? And so we figured it out and we have it. And after the session, it will be available. And I think Alsha will probably be sending out a link when she sent out the survey information, because we do rely on your responses. And it's really important that you do give us your feedback on the sessions that we have. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, I just want to restate the purpose of this platform. The Learning Cafe was born out of a need to create a safe space where people could ask questions and feel comfortable in asking something that they wouldn't ordinarily ask in a large group. And we want you to feel and know that this is a safe space. And for those of you who feel that you have a question and you want to ask or you want to make a comment, we ask that you remain respectful, as all of our attendees are. You can unmute yourself, ask your question, or make your comment. And if for those of you who may be a little shy about speaking out, we have a chat box. Especially if you're doing a Zoom and you're on your computer. And you don't have to send the message. For those of you who may not be technologically savvy, you do not have to send your message to everyone. You can just go to the Dropbox. You want to explain that part?
Yeah, so where it says to and then everyone, there's a Dropbox, and then you can hit privately, and then you can send a message to us and we just see it.
And when we receive the message, we'll read the comment, but we will not mention your name. Again, the whole purpose of this space is for it to be safe. And we wanted to provide an opportunity for people to just talk and learn about different things that they wouldn't ordinarily talk about in their office space, or they wouldn't talk about in the workplace and that sort of thing. So please keep that in mind as we move forward. And again, as we're getting into the session, we want you to remember that we are recording, okay? And because so many people ask for information. Now, you didn't tune in to listen to me, and I know that. However, you did tune in to listen to someone who I am just honored to introduce. And this is Lois Cooper. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Lois. Lois is an associate certified coach. She's a diversity and inclusion consultant and trainer, professional speaker, and a published author. She is a featured speaker for global conferences and summits, and we could be here until 1 o'clock reading about all of her accomplishments. But she is also a content developer and a faculty member of the American Management Association and an adjunct professor for the Graduate Human Resource Management Program of Stony Brook University. She facilitates professional development initiatives across industries such as banking, media, retail, and consumer services. Lois is currently the diversity director for the New York State Society for Human Resource Management and was credentialed as an associate certified coach by the International Coach Federation. Lois received her MBA from Baruch College in New York City and a BA from American University in Washington, D.C. Today, Lois is going to give us some background information about this amazing project she's working on, but she's also going to share some information about anti-racism. So, the Anti-Racism Project is Lois Cooper.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for that, Fanny. And you know that anytime you ask me to do anything, I will definitely try my best to do it. Okay?
Thank you, Lois.
And diversity has always been a passion of mine. And I think that's from when I got fired from my first job. And I was 5 years old and in the first grade at Marshall Street Elementary School. There were 16 students in our class. We had snack time every afternoon. Only 8 students, parents, had enough money to have their kids get the milk. However, every day, myself and my partner would take our crate and go down to the, um, I guess, the ice box, and I would say, please give me 16 milks, because I thought everybody should have milk and that it should be fair for everyone. And so one day, my teacher said to me, Lois, if you bring back 16 milks, you're fired. And I was like, okay. And so I go with my partner, we go down to the refrigerator, we say to the janitor, how many milks do you need? I said, 16. And so my partner says, no, 8. And I was like, 16. So I brought back 16 milks. I'll come back to the class. The teacher says, how many milks do you have? I said, 16. She said, you're fired. But you know what? It was okay because I still felt that everybody needed to be included. And that's how I continue to feel today. And that led me to a career in human resources. It led me to a career in diversity and inclusion. And even if diversity was not part of my job, at one point I was heading up employee relations for a company. I asked for diversity and inclusion because I wanted to have that. I wanted to have that responsibility. I wanted to have that voice. I wanted to be able to share with people. So that's what kind of led me, even after my corporate career ended due to the company relocating out of state, that I still said, you know what? I'm still going to continue this work. So as Fanny did say, I do diversity and inclusion consulting and training as one of the several things that I do as part of my portfolio career. And so that led me to Raising Voices. I live in Long Island, and Raising Voices is a local organization that basically there was a group of people who said, you know, we need to do something and we need to make a difference. And so their 3 prongs are basically anti-racism, it's immigration rights, and it's voting rights. And those are the things that they are very active in. So naturally, I became a member of the Unity and Diversity Committee. I think that's no surprise. So with that, we talked about what is it that we can do. And I'd had the opportunity to experience with one of my colleagues who's on the line, Rena Ryback. Hi, Rena. And if there's anyone else from our group that's on the line, please feel free to chime in. But we had the opportunity to be exposed to some curriculum by a team of women called Cultural Bridges to Justice. And we were like so impacted by that. We asked them, can we use some of your curriculum to reach out to our community? And they were wonderful about that. And so there were, I guess, 7 of us who spent about, I'm going to say at least 6 months developing a curriculum. We launched it last fall. It was an 8-week session. And so we had 2 groups, one on Tuesday nights, one on Wednesday nights. And I was one of the Wednesday facilitators. And we put probably about, my number may be a little bit off, but we put probably about 40 people through this initiative and this program. And what I found very interesting about it as well is that the demographics of the group was very diverse. So the demographics of the group was probably 85% Caucasian and then 15% people of color. So it brought a good mix and a lot of great discussion to the program. The Anti-Racism Project explores systemic racism, institutional racism, white privilege, microaggressions, and also just trying to bust some myths and facts that unfortunately we've all learned. So something that I say is that there is no such thing as unconscious bias, but that these are things that have learned. And many people have learned them from the time that they were 2 years old or younger. And at the Thanksgiving table with relatives. So I know for me, in my corporate life, I could not change people's attitudes and what they had learned. But what I could say and what I did say is that during the hours that you are working for this organization, either on-site, off-site, traveling, whatever it might be, these are the behaviors that we expect. And these are the behaviors that we want you to exhibit. So I think the Raising Voices and Anti-Racism Project actually tried to go a little bit deeper and actually tried to get people to rethink some of the myths and facts that they had learned. And quite frankly, the goal was to come up with an action plan for what can you now do with this information to make a difference in our communities. It was a wonderful experience. Right now, we are doing, or there's a series of kind of mini workshops going on to get the word out there about our project. And there is a plan in place to do another 8-week workshop again, starting in the fall. So, like I said, it was so rewarding. We all learned so much, and it was just very, very powerful. I think, one of the things that we talked about were some historical moments in US racism. And so one of the things that I wanted to share and that I thought could be beneficial for the people on the call today was just the definition of white and where that came from. And that was developed in the 1700s. And it was basically developed to determine which was the group who was going to have power. So that's how this all started. People wanted to have power. Power is money. And the desire for power, unfortunately, has gotten us to label individuals, put people into groups, and to treat some groups as they are better than others. And so I think that's just something important to understand, that this is a whole man-made system that's really not based on any facts at all. So there's no difference between skin color, culture. Yes, there's cultural differences, absolutely. But this is a man-made system that's been imposed on us. And we need to know that and understand it if we're going to make any changes. I think another one that I think is important in terms of a fact that I want to point out is that in 1830, the Indian Removal Act was passed. And the whole basic point of that was that people could be moved off of their traditional and sacred lands. And so that's how this country was built. And so when you think about the, whole discussion about immigration today, it's very, very interesting, but it's also very challenging because this country was built on the backs of the indigenous people. And I think that's important for people to understand. I think another one that I would bring up is the Tuskegee Institute experiment from 1932 to 1972, where for 40 years, African American men mostly who were in prison were exposed to syphilis and purposely not treated so that doctors could understand what the symptoms were, what the disease was like, and I guess ultimately come up with a cure. A lot of these people, they weren't even told that this is what happened to them. And that's an amazing impact to have on them and their families. And I just think it's important that this is a part of our history, a part of the American history that a lot of people don't know and that we need to understand. So Fanny, I've talked for about 10 minutes. And so I want to take a breath.
Yeah.
And I want to just see if you or anyone has any questions or anything that they'd like to bring up before moving on.
Well, everyone, you now have an opportunity to ask questions, but before you do, while you're thinking of your question, you can either be typing in
The chat.
or the chat box. But I have one. Lois, you mentioned about the man-made system.
Yes.
But were there solutions as to how we tackle the system together, collectively?
You know, quite frankly,
Especially since you had 85% of the attendees in that session were white, with 15% people of color. I just think it would be, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to hear the conversations that took place.
yes. They were very real conversations. And I really appreciate the people who participated because you had to show some vulnerability, you know, to be a participant. And so I appreciate that. This was not to judge or blame anyone, but it's really just to say, this is what we've got. What can we now do about it? Okay. So some of the solutions, well, first of all, you have to partner with others because we cannot do this work alone. So you have to partner with the community. You have to partner with different nonprofit organizations that have a similar mission and vision that you do. It is working with your local legislators to say, what can we do to change X so that Y is changed in our neighborhoods? It is talking to employers about fairness in employment opportunities. One of the things, one of the many hats that I wear is with the Urban League of Long Island. And so what we found was through a whole series of studies that took us about 2 years to do in partnership with other organizations, is that just for Nassau and Suffolk counties alone, that if there was equity in housing, employment, education, etc., that the whole of Long Island would be $24 billion richer. This is not a zero-sum game. If we all benefit, we all rise. And I think that's something else that other people need to understand and be aware of. So it's not about if you give this group more, you get less. This is about we all gain. So we have to be vocal. We have to be vocal with our local legislators, and we have to come up with some plans to hold people accountable for the decisions that they make.
Okay, thank you. When you think about, it's just stop me if there's a question that pops up. When you think about institutional racism and structural racism, I'm sure that this was incorporated at one point throughout these 8 weeks that you were together. For those on the call who may think that they have an idea of what that means, because we throw around terms, you know, back in the day, and for those of you, my son says that I'm old as dirt, but back in the day, the terms were much simpler. And so over the years, there are a lot of terms that have come up, and some people are still in the dark for
Mhm.
in understanding specific terms. Could you talk a little bit about structural racism and institutional racism and how it's playing out in this conversation and how it might have played out in the project?
Well, I'll just be honest with you. The answer to every question around this issue is economics. And that's what I'm saying to everyone. It's all about economics. And so there are systems put in place to help people succeed. And there are systems that are put in place to have people not have access. And not having access throughout your entire life. And Fanny, based on the work that you do with early learning children, you know that this can start preschool age with Black and brown children being suspended from school for behavioral issues at a much higher rate than students who are Caucasian.
Absolutely.
So once you start that pattern, it impacts your self-esteem. It impacts the teacher's perspective on you and who you are. And then this just carries on. And then by the time you're now in high school, that's why the dropout rate is very high, because people don't see any hope in the system. And I know that I participated in a mentoring program in my corporate life in a school district that was underserved on Long Island. And I remember saying, okay, well, we'll start with the high school students, we'll talk to them about how to get a job and whatnot. And the superintendent said to me, too late. And I was like, oh, okay. I said, well, we'll start with the middle school students and we'll talk about, career options and how they can plan now. Superintendent says, too late. And so we actually had to start that mentoring program with second grade.
Oh, God.
Okay? Because it was only at that point where they hadn't had the level of experience in rejection, quite frankly. I remember sitting with the principal of the school, and we were looking at who can be mentored or partnered up for mentoring. And she had a list of students about 2 pages long, typed. And I said, well, what's this list? And she said, this is a list of students with 1 or more parents incarcerated. Now, the whole incarceration rate kind of follows and flows this whole institutional and structural racism. So it's all part of this. It's huge, but it's all about economics. So, I'm going to jump a little bit to immigration, but when you look at these, I'm not sure what to call them, shelters, places where people are being held, particularly children, this really mimics and goes back to slaves from Africa and what was done to those families that were pulled apart, that children were much more valuable than adults because you could enslave them for so much longer and make so much more money. So all of this comes down to economics. And I think if people really start to understand that, you'll start to question why things are being done.
Thank you. We have a question.
Yeah, we have a comment and a question. So thank you for taking the time to share the facts. Good afternoon. My question is, how do we encourage culturally specific organizations without seemingly rejecting inclusion?
I think that's where the partnerships come in, because I think if you partner with different types of organizations, for example, I know that Raising Voices partners with the Martin Luther King Center in Rockville Center. They partner with the Hispanic Brotherhood of Rockville Center. And so between all of those different groups, you're reaching different audiences with your message. So I'm very big on partnering. And so I think if you partner with different groups, you're also showing inclusion.
Very good. Thank you. I have this question asked of me quite often, and I wonder if you received the same question, Lois, and that is, when an organization is about to undertake a mission as developing, or they should have, inclusion statements, and they're placing it in their strategic plan. They have a line item with funds dedicated to that line item, and they're really serious about it. Should it be mandatory for all employees to participate in inclusion activities? Or should it be left to volunteer basis?
I'm going to say for leadership, it's got to be mandatory because people will follow what the leaders in their organization do. So I know at one time I was putting together a mentorship program within my organization. And so I wanted to show the list of mentors or who I was proposing to my CEO. And so I stuck his name in the middle of the list. He really wouldn't see it. So he started to look at the list and he goes, I want to be a mentor, and I want every single one of my direct reports to be a mentor as well. And that led to such a successful program that over the years we had about 20% of the organization that went through that initiative. And we had about 500 people in our building. And so that was a really tribute. So for leadership, I think it has to be mandatory. Personally, I think it should be mandatory for everyone. Now, I have heard this said, and I don't know if I agree, but I've heard it said that even if it's not mandatory, just the fact that the organization is offering diversity and inclusion training, it sends a statement. I don't know if that's strong enough for me. Okay, so that's my opinion.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that. So, can Blacks be racist?
No. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because racism is really it's not about skin color, culture, or any of those things. It's about power. And so if you're not the group that is in control and has power, technically you can't be a racist. And that goes for women and men and all other groups. So it's about power. And I think also to think of it in that way makes a difference as well.
Okay.
My opinion, but based on some research and facts.
Yes, I hear it. I hear it. Listen, people, I'm going to keep asking questions for the entire hour, so you better jump in.
I see someone else in the chat.
This is your space. And so you can type in, you can unmute yourself, you can chime in anyways, but I'll just keep asking questions from now on. So anytime, just interrupt. So here's a question. You indicated in some aspects about what racism, how you've seen racism show up.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share additional ways racism manifests itself?
Okay, I'll give you a story.
Okay.
A personal story. I was with my daughter. She was very young at the time. I was in a store and I was looking for a leather jacket. And so all of the jackets were locked, okay, to the display.
Yes.
So I go over to the young lady who's working there in the retail store, asked her if she can unlock the jacket so I can try them on. So she comes over, she unlocks them, and then she says, I have to watch you. And so I was like, well, you can watch me and my money walk right out this front door. Okay? So,
Oh my God.
and that's not even a microaggression. That was just, in your face.
Yeah.
But these
Wow.
are things that people deal with on a regular basis. And it can make you angry. And I think, people don't understand that. But that's why when there are multiple shootings of African American men across the country, that's why people are angry. And that's why people are saying, you know what? Black Lives Matter. Because it just seems that in a lot of circumstances, that's not the case. So there are those types of things that happen. And when it happens on such a regular basis, it kind of wells up inside and it has to be expressed somehow. So, when you're looking at the news and you're looking at, people who are marching or anything like that, understand there's a whole backdrop for this. And there's
Absolutely.
a reason for people to feel that level of anger. So I just kind of wanted to say that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have
We have
a few questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So could you expand upon whether bias can be wholly unconscious?
I was at a meeting earlier this year, and the speaker was born and raised in London. And she said that when she would be a young girl and she's out with her mom, if a person from African descent came by them or walked near them, her mom would grab her purse and clutch it to her. And so then she started to do the same thing because she just thought that's what you're supposed to do. So was it unconscious? I don't think so. She observed it in somebody else that she trusted and loved. And so therefore she imitated that same behavior without even necessarily understanding why. And then she had to kind of think later to say, why am I doing this? And then kind of unlearn that behavior. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. If not, the individual can type another question in. But in the meantime, we have additional questions. This is good.
Yeah, this is really good.
Okay.
How would someone deal with microaggressions in the workplace without confrontation?
You can't. There's going to be some level of discomfort. And I think you have to get comfortable with that. I know very often I would be typing up an email and I'm sending it to like all of our leaders in the organization. And I hit the send button. I'm like, okay, it's out in the universe. Let's see what comes back. But I think it's really kind of pointing out, because let's say people are not aware of the impact of their behavior. And maybe to say to them privately, I know this wasn't your intent, but this is the effect that this behavior had on me. And I wanted to share that with you. And I think I also think about the platinum rule, which is treat people the way they want to be treated.
Absolutely.
So even if you just say, can I share something about the platinum rule with you and how I might like to be treated in the future? So that we're not judging, we are not blaming, but we are not opening ourselves up to have this continue to happen, because that's what we want to avoid. And if we can create a level of awareness, hopefully that person will think about that conversation with you before doing the same thing with someone else.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lois. These are great. We have more.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh.
This is more of a,
Yeah.
this is more of a comment.
Okay.
In our manual, the definition of structural racism is the ways in which history, ideology, public policies, institutional practices, and culture interact to maintain a racial hierarchy that allows the privileges associated with whiteness and disadvantages associated with color to endure and adapt over time.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Love it. Thank you.
Wow. Wow.
Very well said. Thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna save that one.
Yes.
All of that. Use that as a definition.
I love it.
Do we have?
I know.
Okay, that was great. Oh,
Thank you.
whoever sent that, there's a way I'm sure that we're going to be able to pull it off the recorder. Because I like that. I like the definition there. That's really
Yes.
that. Okay. So until someone else type in, how do you internalize racism?
Well, that's very interesting. Okay, because we talked about that in our workshop. And it wasn't a topic that I was a fan of because I didn't feel that way. However, I was doing an entrepreneur workshop, and there was an African American male in the class, and he said that he became an entrepreneur because over time, hearing so many negative messages about Black men, that he started to believe them. And he started to doubt himself. And he started to not feel confident that he had a place in kind of the corporate or, more business-like setting. So it does exist. And so we are all different, but it does exist, and it impacts the choices that we make for the rest of our lives and the rest of our families' lives. Now, in his case, I have to say, he became very successful with his business, and what he's doing now is he's expanding. So he has a brother in Atlanta, a sister in Charlotte, whatever it might be. And so he's setting them up with businesses using the same business model that he has used locally so that they can be independent and on their feet. And I love that.
Absolutely.
I have to say, I love that idea.
Absolutely. We have a couple more comments?
Yeah, I think they answered it, but can you repeat the name of the curriculum you mentioned, and in what ways can an agency incorporate it? And I think the answer was that definition was from the Antiracism Project Manual and was sent in by one of our facilitators.
Okay.
Cool. That's
Wonderful.
a great definition. When you mention about internalized racism, there's two examples came to mind.
Okay.
And I'd like your thought on this. One was, I don't know whether you saw the movie, The Hate You Give. Most people of color, in my opinion, probably, it was a tough movie for me. I can say that it was a tough movie for me. And for those who did not see it, the beginning of the movie starts out with an African American family pulling their young children in from the play yard, if I remember this correctly, and teaching them right up front, hands on the dashboard, hands on the dashboard. You ever get stopped by a police officer, hands on the dashboard. And of course, I would find that troubling because we know that communication, that training is not going on in all households, only because they don't have to.
Correct.
And so that was one part of the movie that not about internalized racism, but it was something that I wasn't crazy about, but it's reality. It's reality in many homes. But there was a scene where there was an African-American young man. He was shot and killed and by a police officer. And a Black police officer was asked a question by his niece that if that had been a white man dressed in a nice suit, driving a nice car, would the officer, meaning him, would you have hesitated before pulling the trigger, before shooting? And I'm paraphrasing the whole thing. And the Black officer, her uncle, said, yes. He would have waited if it was a white man dressed, driving a certain car. A Black man said this. Another example came to mind was when we were working on the expulsion and suspension project. Part of the research, we had an intern that went through lots and lots of research. And one source provided information where 176 police officers, mostly white, were surveyed to talk about how they viewed Black children, or Black and brown children, especially boys. Comments were made like they dehumanize them. They see them as much older than their white counterpart. They are labeled troubled, and the list went on and on and on. But the line that I always highlight is the word mostly, because that indicates that they weren't all white, that there were people of color who was seeing the same thing. Get what I'm saying? So that's internalized to your comment earlier, how you can hear something over a period of time, you view something over a period of time, and eventually you begin to internalize those messages. And so when I saw that, and those two incidents came to mind immediately when sharing, your story and that information.
Well, the media definitely plays a mind game.
It does. It does. It does.
So the repetition of certain news clips and things like that can lead some people to think that way.
Yes.
That's part of the structural and institutional racism.
Absolutely.
And it's meant to be that way, and it's meant to have that effect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So those are great stories. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. But they just came to mind immediately while you were talking. They did. We have a comment or a question.
Yeah, a comment. Yeah. Not all people of color are African Americans. These prejudices span over other people of color, such as Hindu and Caribbean cultures as well.
Absolutely. I have a quick story to share, and thank you for sharing that comment. And one of the reasons why throughout our expulsion suspension kit, we talk about Black and brown. We refer to Black and brown. I remember I went to a national conference last year, and while I was at this conference, there were a room filled with Asians, and I've shared this before on this platform. First time I've ever seen that many Asians in one room in my entire life, and I won't tell you how old I am. Just remember, my son said I'm older than dirt. So I'm sitting in there and I'm listening to the comments that were being made. And the thing that I found interesting, that if I closed my eyes and just listened to things, the statements and comments, they mirrored many comments that I've heard from African American and other Black and brown groups. And that was when I was like, that was an aha moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for many others, they might think, really? But it was. It was an aha moment. And this is a safe space. And I'll share my learning as well. And that was a learning moment for me.
And, you know, I agree. And, you know, one of the things and exercises that we did in the project was called the Cage of Oppression, where we looked at not just Black and white, but we looked at Islamophobism, and we looked at, you know, sexism, and we looked at ageism, we looked at colorism, and we looked at all of these things, and all of these isms impact people on a regular basis. I actually, when you talk about the Asian population, I was at a conference that was geared toward that group. And one of the things that struck me was that several people shared that in their workplaces, they had been called by someone else's name.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that's what I said. So, you know, this is rampant, guys, you know, out there.
Absolutely.
So I absolutely appreciate, you know, talking about all of these groups. Our project really focused on anti-racism, and in the community that we're talking about, it's more Caucasian, African American, some Caribbean, and Hispanic. So that's kind of where we focused.
Okay. Wow. Thank you, Lois. We have a comment or question. Comment.
We work in a nonprofit agency that works to assist minorities access certain government services. How can we as an agency combat the institutional racism our clients face to help facilitate their access to the resources they are eligible for? For example, for many of our clients are non-English speakers, but the government agencies don't provide translators. I guess it was a question and a comment.
Yeah. Wow.
That's huge.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
You
is.
know, that's a big one. You
Should
know,
I repeat the question again, part?
Yeah.
Just so you have it.
So she's going to repeat the question part again, Lois.
okay.
Can we as an agency combat the institutional racism our clients face to help facilitate their access to resources they are eligible for?
And I know the example that was given was about there are not translators in place
Right. Yeah.
at some of
Correct.
the institutions.
Thank you. Yes.
Maybe that's a service that can be provided by the nonprofit. And maybe we can get, you know, do a grant to say, you know, we need to get people access to these services. We need to have translators that can go with our clients to these places so that they can access the services. Just a thought, an idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
I saw Rena Ryback, my colleague.
There are other questions and there are other questions and comments. I just want to put this thought on the table, and that is this work, whether you're doing it with a partner or within an organization, it has to be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a journey. It is not going to happen overnight, but I think it's important that we keep in mind that we just take one step at a time, you know. And I was reminded about a comment made, and I know others have heard this before, about this man who saw the little boy on the beach, and he was walking along, was picking the fish up, and he was throwing, you know, one fish back at a time. And someone came along and said, all these fish have come to shore. How are you going to get them all back in? You know, you're just throwing one in at a time. You're never going to get it done. And he said, it doesn't make a difference. He said, to that one I just threw back, it did. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're doing. One thing at a time. So here's some more questions and comments. And
so thank you for your great contributions. I think this is why it is important to have staff that can bridge these cultural and language barriers.
Absolutely.
And then there's an event thing. If anyone is local to Long Island, please consider attending one of the Antiracism Project's mini workshops on microaggressions and white privilege, May 2nd at Rockville Center Library, 7 to 9 p.m., May 9th. You could see all that. Yeah. Please go to our website, antiracismproject.org, for a listing of all events and resources.
And that's my colleague, Rena. Thank you, Rena.
Yes, and everybody can see that.
Yeah.
And that, I think that is wonderful. So, what do you have a wrap up thought, Lois? And you know, what can we do? We've listened to all of this good stuff, and it was good. And I mean, even from the people that were typing in their messages and their comments, all of it. We're in this together.
Yes.
Thought would you like to leave with us?
Well, one thing that I'm going to do, because I'm not going to be able to find it easily now on my phone, but there was actually a quote from the Bible that I read recently that was so applicable to all of this that I'd love for you to send it out to everyone on the call. I don't think it would be offensive in any way, but it really is talking about continuing what we do and continuing to have hope. And I will just share with you that under this current administration, my hope was smashed, smashed. And so I continue to talk about this with any and everyone that I can, because I think just by getting the word out that it's going to make a difference. So I love telling my family at the end of the day, I'm going to be the topic of a lot of people's dinner conversations tonight. So make yourself the topic of someone's dinner conversation.
Absolutely. I love that. Listen, there are more comments. I thought I was going to let you off, but there are more comments. So can we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a learning moment when I had a family in my school who was a white couple with an adopted Black child, and they once referred to me as white privileged. I was so offended, as I never saw myself that way. I figured if I understood racism, taught about differences among us as individuals, that I did not portray that as an individual. How, as a white woman, do I not carry that stereotype as an individual?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Very good question.
And so I think it's just being mindful that it is something that is carried with you, whether it's intentional or not, but it's then using it. So I know that in the Antiracism Project, we had a discussion and a conversation about people participating in different social justice marches. And it came up from a Caucasian woman, and she said, if we surround this group like a ring, no one's going to touch them, and we can protect them because no one's going to hurt us. And so, you know what? I never would have thought of anything like that. But it was like, wow, that had a ring of truth to it. And so wherever you can, speak up, speak out.
Absolutely. Here's another good question. Thank you. This is a good question.
How can you get this project in Suffolk?
How to get this project in Suffolk County?
What I would do is I would go onto the website and, put in, contact us and see if there's anything that we can do. But
Absolutely.
You're welcome to join us in Rockville Center.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, any more questions, comments? Because we're 4 minutes away. 4 minutes away. Well, or 3 minutes, actually. We're 3 minutes away I can't even begin. I mean, before I thank Lois and before I let you go, um, I'm telling you, this was such a great session for me. And obviously it was for, oh, there's another question. Is the event free in RVC?
Yes, it's free. You just have to be over 18 or over to participate.
Have to be, okay, all right. So I'm going to wrap this up fast because there's going to be a lot of other questions. I say, yay, free, yay, thank you. So here's a couple things I want to make thank Lois Cooper for doing an outstanding job, as I knew she would. This was just so fantastic. You shared and covered so many bases, and I got a feeling that you all on Long Island better start getting ready for this anti-racism project, because I got a feeling you're going to be getting a lot of requests, not just on Long Island, but in other parts of the state. Okay, so get ready for that. But thank you so very much, Lois. I have a couple of comments that I want to make, another comment I want to make is that we are hosting, the Early Care and Council is hosting its first Equity, Inclusion, and Leadership Conference June 13th in Latham, New York, where we're going to be centering the information around the expulsion and suspension of Black and Brown children, but how that plays out in the law enforcement community, the military, and in the business community, skills gap issues and challenges. We are going to have Dr. Walter Gillian, who is going to kick the entire event off. If you know anything about him, he is the godfather of expulsion and suspensions.
Wow.
And yeah, he is out of Yale University. He's just fabulous. And we have a police chief who's going to talk about how this looks in the law enforcement community. We have a commander from the Navy that is going to talk about how it shows up in military. We have Linda Smith, who is formerly from the Obama administration, is going to be talking about the funding gaps. And we have, am I missing anyone? Oh, and we have Bill Millett, who is going to be closing the gaps on how all of these different sectors get a springboard from what takes place in early education. Mm-hmm. So the information is posted on our website. It will be going out, and we encourage as many of you as possible to come to the conference. It's going to be one day, our very first, and we believe it's going to be very informative. The last comment that I want to leave with everyone is that our next Learning Cafe is going to take place on May 9th at 12 noon, where we will have Stan Kilmer, who is going to talk about his journey and 8 life lessons as an out gay man that can apply to everyone, and what he learned about the LGBTQ community on the way. So watch for that information. Look for the survey that is going to be coming out. Please complete it, and we just thank you and want you to have the best day ever. And Lois, much appreciated. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Enjoy. Bye-bye.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Oh, you sign? Yeah.